Across the world, amusement parks entertain the masses, offering a relatively safe yet thrilling place for summer vacations, family weekends, and spontaneous outings. But while most provide a wholesome, family-friendly experience, one park in New Jersey became infamous for near constant injuries, frequent lawsuits, and even deaths. So today we're going to dive into the story of Action Park, the ultimate embodiment of Gen X's screw around and find out mentality. It indeed earned nicknames like Class Action Park and Accident Park during its 1980s heyday. Class Action Park? Oh. When most people think of New Jersey, they picture its proximity to New York City. Wait, I just pictured Jersey Shore. Its dense population or the beaches of Jersey Shore. There we go. One thing, but I meant the TV show. One thing the state is unusually associated with, however, is skiing. Yet it's not entirely absent, and Vernon Township in the north is one of the few exceptions. Despite sitting just an hour's drive from New York City off of Route 94, Vernon has a small population spread across several unincorporated communities. Tucked into the Kittatinny Mountains, a section of the Appalachian Range, its landscape is dotted with valleys, rolling hills, and lush green peaks. By the mid-60s, locals began taking advantage of the surrounding terrain and built ski resorts. In 1971, 3 of these resorts emerged to form the Vernon Valley Great Gorge Resort. 3 years later, the newly merged entity was purchased by Great American Recreation, or GAR, founded by Gene Mulvihill, a former stockbroker who was disgraced and essentially banned from Wall Street for running a pump-and-dump penny stock scheme. Some things never change. GAR quickly recognized the core challenge of operating ski resorts in the Northeast. Much of the year doesn't really bring any business. To counter this, Mulvihill invested in snowmaking equipment, but even that wasn't enough, and he kept brainstorming. Eventually, he envisioned a place where people could enjoy any thrill-seeking experience they wanted, one where they could make the rides go as fast or as high as they pleased. Now, one common way ski resorts make money in the off-season is by installing alpine slides. These rides mimic a toboggan run, letting guests race a small wheeled sled down a smooth, concave track on a hillside. Following that model, GAR built its own 2,700-foot or 820-meter alpine slide running the length of the slope between one of the ski chairlifts, which carried riders to the top. Each sled was equipped with a handbrake so guests could choose to speed up or slow down as they pleased. After adding a few other attractions, GAR officially opened Action Park in 1978, dividing it into 3 main areas. The first, the Alpine Center, anchored by the slide, also briefly featured a skateboard park and monorail called the Transmobile, which ferried guests between the Alpine Center and Motor World, the second section. Motor World offered attractions such as super go-karts, Lola cars, which were basically just open cockpit race cars, and battle action tanks, a crowd favorite where visitors drove miniature tanks and fired tennis balls at one another from the cannon, which does sound pretty fun. The third and most popular section, Water World, showcased an array of aquatic attractions, many of which, unfortunately, proved as hazardous as they were fun. While designing many of his new attractions, Mulvihill decided that consulting engineers and other experts was just a bit pointless. Instead, he had the rides designed in-house, and rather than conducting proper inspections and tests, just offered employees a $100 bonus to try them out. Unsurprisingly, many rides ended up being fantastical to the point of extreme danger. Within the first month of operation, rides were already causing problems and injuring guests. Unfortunately, the true number of accidents and injuries will never be known, as staff were openly instructed not to report them whenever possible. Those we do know about, however, are more than enough to show how tragic the situation was. At Motorworld, employees discovered how to override the speed governors on the Lola carts, allowing the small vehicles to reach speeds of up to 60 miles an hour. That's nearly 100 kilometers an hour, something staff even self-admittedly tested on the nearby highway. Meanwhile, the skate park survived only one season. Its poorly poured, uneven concrete led to numerous injuries that just went unreported. One of Mulvihill's most dangerous ideas, though, was the Bailey Ball. Conceived for the Alpine Center, it involved a large steel sphere in which riders would roll down a PVC pipe track running alongside a ski trail. After designing and assembling the Bailey Ball, GAR conducted its usual testing, sending an employee inside. This time, however, a state inspector happened to be present. Unfortunately for everyone involved, it was a hot day, something GAR had overlooked. When PVC heats, it warps and expands, a fact they'd either ignored or somehow forgotten about during the design phase. On its first run, the ball jumped the track, careening down the mountainside across the parking lot and over Route 94 before finally stopping in a swamp on the far side of the highway. Miraculously, no one was injured, but the inspector silently walked off. The project was promptly scrapped. Of the attractions that did open, perhaps the most dangerous was the Alpine Slide. While similar rides elsewhere have proven safe, Action Park's version quickly gained a notorious reputation. The sleds were poorly maintained, with many developing brake issues. Some had no braking power at all, while others just locked up mid-run. As such, riders frequently crashed into others ahead of them, and the slide's proximity to the ski lift meant that those below were often harassed, pelted with objects, or even spit on by people riding up. Worse still were the abrasions caused by the track's concrete and fiberglass surface, compounded by the minor falls that were common and only made worse by patrons' tendency to wear only bathing suits throughout the park. During its operation, the Alpine Slide racked up at least 26 serious head injuries and 14 fractures, but its worst incident occurred in 1980. That year, 19-year-old local George Larson Jr. was thrown from his sled after it left the track, striking his head on nearby rocks. He spent over a week in a coma before dying, marking Action Park's first fatality. Rather than repair or close the ride, GAR simply posted gruesome photos of injuries at the top, alongside warnings and reminders to sign liability waivers. If this wasn't enough to sound alarms, well, the real danger was still lying ahead in Action Park's Waterworld section. At the Tarzan swing, guests clutched a 20-foot or 6-meter cable hanging from a steel arch and rode it out over the water, where they could release and drop into the pool below. The problem is that many let go too early and crashed brutally into the water, while others froze and held on too long, scraping their feet across the concrete at the far side. To make matters worse, the pool water was reportedly always kept frigid, and lifeguards often had to swim out to rescue guests who went into shock and seized up. In 1984, one rider even suffered a fatal heart attack after plunging into the icy water and died. Even more dangerous than the Tarzan swing was the wave pool, among the first of its kind in the US, and grimly nicknamed the Grave Pool by locals. Guys. Filled with fresh water and producing waves up to 40 inches high, it overwhelmed many visitors, especially those from urban areas who didn't know how to swim, which made up a surprising number of Action Park's guests. On crowded weekends and peak days, up to 12 lifeguards were stationed there, saving an average of 30 people a day at the wave pool alone. When it comes to minor injuries, however, few rides were as notorious as the Cannonball Loop, an enclosed water slide with a full vertical loop. In the 2020 documentary Class Action Park, Jim Desai, the park's former security director, recalled how the first riders to test it emerged with bloody mouths from poorly installed padding. Undeterred, operators sent a second group through, only for them to come out covered in lacerations. Staff were baffled until they discovered teeth from the first riders still embedded in the padding. Oh, dude. After removing the teeth and reinforcing the interior, the ride continued operating, though guests still reported bloody noses, broken teeth, and other injuries from slamming against the slide's walls. On one occasion, a rider became stuck at the top of the loop. After what must have been a difficult rescue, an escape hatch was added for future emergencies. In 1985, New Jersey's advisory board on carnival amusement ride safety shut the slide down for reasons that were then really bloody obvious. Although it briefly reopened a few times, each attempt triggered another wave of injuries, ensuring it was quickly closed again. Another fatal accident at the Waterpark came from the kayak experience, which simulated whitewater rapids using underwater electrical fans. In 1982, 27-year-old Jeffrey Nathan was thrown from his kayak into the water, which had been in contact with a loose wire. He was fatally electrocuted. Later, two other riders present that day told the New York Times that they'd also felt shocks even from the safety of their boats. Following Nathan's death, the kayak experience was permanently closed. And this was only the tip of the iceberg. Mulvihill was constantly devising new attractions to draw crowds with little concern for guest safety, and fractured collarbones, broken femurs, busted noses, and everything in between became commonplace. The accident-prone environment was only worsened by the abundance of alcohol, drugs, and sheer recklessness. Vendors throughout the park sold alcohol with minimal ID checks, and intoxicated minors were a common sight, along with staff members drinking openly during their shifts. At local hospitals, many Action Park patients were reportedly both injured and intoxicated, and often underage. As is typical when alcohol flows freely, fights broke out regularly and harassment was rampant. Yet the park made little effort to curb drinking or enforce stricter rules. Instead, GAR leaned into its reputation, continuing to churn out new and dangerous rides, cementing Action Park as the true Wild West of amusement parks where just about anything went. But just like the Wild West, law and order had to come for the park eventually. During Action Park's 18-year run, GAR and Melville faced more than 100 lawsuits. To make matters worse, the amusement tycoon had an infamous disdain for insurance, even liability coverage. In his view, it was each individual's responsibility to assess risk and ensure their own safety, even on the rides that he had made. To get around the issue, in 1977, he and GAR devised a scheme. They created a fake insurance company that not only made them appear covered on paper, but also generated extra income as they defrauded state agencies, private businesses, the Vernon Township, park patrons, and just about anybody else who was involved. In 1983, the state of New Jersey charged Mulvihill and others at the company with 110 counts of conspiracy, fraud, forgery, theft, and embezzlement. Mulvihill personally was fined more than $45,000, and courts held him accountable for GAR's $250,000 corporate penalty. Yet if the punishment ever fazed him, he definitely didn't show it. By 1995, the park's final season, Mulvihill ran Action Park entirely without liability insurance, this time openly to save money. Shockingly at the time, this was actually perfectly legal in New Jersey. New Jersey, everybody. Meanwhile, the 1983 fines were the only significant legal action ever taken against Action Park, GAR, or Mulvihill, despite the park racking up countless citations between 1979 and 1986 for violations like allowing minors to operate rides and failing to report accidents. Many wondered how the park managed to operate for so long with such impunity, avoiding serious fines, shutdowns, or prison time for those involved. And the answer, according to many, was simple. Action Park was the largest employer in Sussex County, a cornerstone of the local economy, and the state was just unwilling to jeopardize that. The leniency was obvious, as even after 2 more deaths in the wave pool, those of 15-year-old George Lopez in 1982 and 18-year-old Gregory Grandshamps in 1987, the park was not penalized. Instead, it was allowed to simply reclassify the attraction as a pool rather than a ride, subjecting it to weaker safety regulations. Private lawsuits against Mulvihill were equally fraught for many who tried. He ordered his lawyers to avoid settlements whenever possible, dragging nearly every case into drawn-out trials. For victims and families without the resources for years of litigation, this often meant abandoning their claims. In the case of George Larson Jr.'s death, however, Mulvihill's tactics sank to new lows. When Larson's family sued, Action Park failed to even report the fatality, claiming Larson was an employee operating the ride after hours in the rain, and that as an employee, his death didn't need to be reported. But these claims quickly unraveled. While Larson had once worked for Mulvihill, it was at a nearby resort well before the accident, and he was not on the job at the time. According to his family, GAR was cynically twisting his work history to avoid accountability. In the end, GAR was forced to settle, paying Larson's family $100,000. At its peak in the 80s, Action Park drew more than 1 million visitors a year, but as lawsuits mounted and its reputation soured, attendance began to decline. Mulvihill and GAR soon struggled to cover mounting legal costs, and while he kept building new thrilling rides to attract guests, others were forced to close due to safety issues or financial strain. As early as 1989, they tried selling the troubled park, but prospective buyers often walked away after inspections, deeming it a rather bad investment. In 1996, GAR filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and despite efforts to limp through one final season, shut down for good. By then, Action Park had been linked to 6 deaths and countless injuries. After bankruptcy, Canadian operator Intrawest purchased the park and rebranded it as Mountain Creek. They invested in repairs, proper inspections, and safety measures, but in 2010, they too filed for bankruptcy. Mulvihill, still owner of the nearby Crystal Springs Resort, reclaimed the property shortly before his death in 2012. That same year, his family renamed it Action Park once again, though they sold it just 3 years later, with the new owners restoring the Mountain Creek Waterpark name. Today, Mountain Creek markets itself as a safe, family-friendly destination with trained staff and modern equipment, which is nice. Many attractions such as the Tarzan swings, Cannonball Falls, and Alpine Mountain Coaster still echo the original park, but with updated designs and safety standards. Even so, the legend of Accident Park still lives on. Some recall it fondly as a place where they had the wildest fun of their lives, while others remember bloodied loved ones or those who never walked away at all.